The notification light on my phone didn't blink. It glowed, a steady, rhythmic pulse in the 3 a.m., a darkness of my bedroom that felt less like a message and more like a warning. I didn't reach for it with trembling hands. I reached for it with the practiced, steady grip of a woman who spends her days measuring the exact depth of blade wounds. I unlocked the screen. $1,200,000. A wire transfer from a shell corporation I recognized as Julian's primary offshore vehicle. The memo was a masterpiece of cold efficiency. Inheritance advance final. Most wives would have felt a surge of excitement or confusion. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. In my world, money that arrives at 3 a.m. isn't a gift. It's a tombstone. 10 seconds later, the phone vibrated. It was my boss, the chief pathologist at the Cook County morgue. He didn't offer a greeting. His voice was thick with the kind of forced sympathy that usually precedes a disaster. "Madeline," he said, his breath hitching, "I need you to listen. We just got a call from a patrol unit in Lake Forest. They found Julian. He's in a mansion on the lake. He's in a bathtub. And Madeline, he's not alone. Your niece, Brianna. She's there too. They're both deceased." I sat up. My heart didn't race. It seemed to slow down, syncing with the cold logic of the numbers on my bank app. Julian was supposed to be over the Atlantic, halfway to London for a 10-day business trip. Brianna was supposed to be in her dorm at Northwestern. The betrayal was instant. It was public. And as I looked at that $1,200,000, I realized it was supposed to be total. This story gets darker with every second. Before we continue, drop a comment and let me know. If you received $1 million the same hour your spouse was found dead, would you be grateful or terrified? I remained motionless. Grief is a luxury for those who don't understand the mechanics of the human body. As a lead pathologist, I know exactly what happens when the heart stops. It's just a pump failing, a series of chemical reactions ceasing. To me, Julian's death wasn't a tragedy yet. It was a case file. I stood up and walked to my closet. I bypassed the colorful sundresses he liked and pulled out my sharpest black suit. The fabric was crisp, the lines unforgiving. While I dressed, my phone hissed with incoming texts. They were from Beatrice, my mother-in-law. "Don't come to the house, Madeline," the first one read. "The police are already here. We are handling the mess you couldn't. Stay in the city. We will send for you when the arrangements are made." I stared at the screen. Handling the mess. That was Beatrice's specialty. For 10 years, I had been the silent architect of the Reed family's perfection. When Julian's first startup nearly collapsed due to a clerical error that looked a lot like embezzlement, I was the one who worked 80-hour weeks at the morgue to cover our mortgage so he could pivot. When Beatrice's youngest son got into a hit and run, I was the one who used my forensic contacts to ensure the evidence remained inconclusive. I had been the silent investor in their version of family, paying the emotional and financial taxes they were too arrogant to acknowledge. And now, at my husband's expiration, they were trying to evict me from the narrative. The $1,200,000 wasn't an inheritance. It was a severance package. They were firing the widow before the body was even cold. I grabbed my forensic go bag, a heavy leather case containing my personal scalpels, specimen jars, and a high-intensity ultraviolet light. I didn't call a cab. I got into my own car and drove toward Lake Forest. The Chicago skyline blurred past me, a mess of neon and steel, but my mind was a high-resolution scan. The Reeds thought they knew me. They thought I was the quiet, dutiful wife who would take the money and vanish into a cloud of socially acceptable mourning. They forgot that I deal with liars every single day. The dead try to hide the truth under layers of decay and trauma, but they always talk to me. If Julian was dead in a bathtub with a 21-year-old girl, the scene would tell me why. And if Beatrice was telling me to stay away, it meant there was something in that room that she couldn't scrub clean with a checkbook. I pulled up to the lakeside estate 40 minutes later. The red and blue lights of the squad cars danced across the manicured hedges like a fever dream. A young officer tried to block the driveway, his hand hovering near his holster. "This is a restricted scene, ma'am," he said, his voice cracking slightly. I didn't slow down. I rolled down the window and flashed my gold medical examiner's shield. My face was a mask of granite. "I'm Dr. Madeline Reed, lead pathologist for the county. That's my husband in there, and that's my crime scene. Move the barricade, or I'll have your badge for breakfast." He moved. They always move when you speak with the authority of the dead. I parked the car, gripped my bag, and walked toward the front door. This wasn't a breakdown. It was an audit. The interior of the Lake Forest mansion smelled of expensive furniture polish and the metallic, cloying sweetness of fresh death. I didn't hesitate in the foyer. I followed the rhythmic flash of the forensic photographer's cameras upstairs to the master suite. The hallway was lined with members of the Reed family's private security men in suits that cost more than a year of my salary, standing like statues to guard a reputation that was already rotting. I stepped into the bathroom. The air was thick with the scent of an overpowered floral perfume, likely an attempt to mask the acrid smell of narcotics. In the center of the room sat an enormous porcelain jacuzzi tub. Julian was leaning against the rim, his head tilted back as if he were resting after a long day. His eyes were half closed. Slumped beside him was Brianna. Her blonde hair was matted and wet, draped across Julian's chest in a pose that was intentionally carnal, designed to look like a drug-fueled tryst gone wrong. To the police, this was a headline: CEO and niece found in deadly rendezvous. To them, it was a tragedy of depravity. But as I approached the tub, the wife in me died, and the pathologist took over. I pulled on a pair of latex gloves. The snap of the rubber against my wrist was the only sound in the room. I didn't look at Julian's face. I couldn't afford to see the man I'd shared a bed with for 10 years. I looked at the skin of his shoulders and back. Julian's skin was a vibrant, grotesque cherry pink. Most people would assume it was a heat rash from the water. But then I saw the glitch. I gently gripped Julian's cold shoulder and shifted him forward. The deep purple-red stains of livor mortis, the settling of blood after the heart stops, were thick and fixed across his entire back and the back of his thighs. Physics doesn't lie. If a person dies sitting upright in a bathtub, gravity pulls the blood into the lowest points, the buttocks and the calves. The blood stays there, but Julian's blood had settled as if he had been lying flat on a hard floor for at least 4 to 6 hours before being moved into this tub. This wasn't a death scene. It was a theatrical production. My husband hadn't died here in the heat of a scandalous affair. He had been murdered elsewhere, his body stripped, and then posed in this tub like a prop to destroy his character and justify a quick cremation. I stood up, my breath hitching only once. My grief didn't turn into tears. It forged into a white-hot, clinical rage. They hadn't just killed him. They had tried to bury his dignity in a staged gutter. I heard the sharp, rapid click of high heels on the marble floor behind me. I didn't have to turn around to know the villain had arrived. "I told you not to come, Madeline." Beatrice's voice echoed off the tiles, cold and sharp as a razor blade. "Look at the shame you've brought into this house by forcing your way in. Look at what your husband was doing while you were busy cutting up strangers." I turned slowly, my eyes dry and steely. I looked at Beatrice, then at Sebastian, who stood behind her with his hands tucked into his pockets, a faint, mocking smirk on his lips. "He didn't die in this tub, Beatrice," I said, my voice sounding like shifting gravel. "The blood pooling proves he was lying flat on his back for hours. This scene is a lie, and you're the one who directed it." The room went silent. The lead detective paused, his pen hovering over his notepad. Beatrice's face contorted, her mask of mourning slipping for a fraction of a second to reveal something much uglier. Calculation. Beatrice didn't flinch. She stepped closer, the scent of her oud perfume clashing with the sterile stench of the room. "You're hysterical, Madeline. It's understandable. Shock does strange things to the mind, especially a mind as morbid as yours." She turned to the lead detective with a practiced, sorrowful sigh. "Detective, please. My daughter-in-law is clearly suffering a breakdown. My son's reputation is already in tatters. Let's not let her delusions make it worse." Sebastian stepped forward then, adjusting his gold-rimmed glasses. He didn't look like a grieving brother. He looked like a man closing a real estate deal. He pulled an iPad from his leather briefcase and turned the screen toward me. Madeline. He corrected himself with a patronizing tilt of his head. We didn't want to show you this. We wanted to protect you. He swiped through a series of high-resolution photos. Julian and Brianna entering a hotel. Julian laughing as he toasted her with champagne. They'd been seeing each other for 14 months. The transfer he sent you? That wasn't an inheritance. It was a parting gift. He was planning to serve you divorce papers when he got back from London. This accident tonight? It's just the tragic end of a very sordid story. I looked at the photos. The lighting was too perfect. The angles were too deliberate. These weren't candid shots. They were staged evidence. They were gaslighting me in the presence of my husband's corpse. He was left-handed. Sebastian, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that cut through his monologue. Sebastian blinked. What? In this photo, he's holding the glass with his right hand. He's wearing his watch on his right wrist. I stepped back toward the tub, ignoring the detective's hand on my arm. Julian had a motorcycle accident 10 years ago. He had a permanent tremor in his right hand. He couldn't even hold a pen with it, let alone a champagne flute. I didn't wait for a response. I reached into my go bag and pulled out a small medical penlight. I knew what I was looking for. If the scene was staged, the cause of death wasn't an overdose. It was something faster, something cleaner. Get her away from the body! Beatrice shrieked, her voice losing its aristocratic polish. I was faster. I tilted Julian's head to the left, exposing the thin skin behind the ear, right over the mastoid bone. There, under the intense white light of my penlight, was a minuscule red dot, a puncture wound so small it looked like an insect bite, but around it was a faint, subcutaneous bruise, a sign of a struggle the heart made before it stopped. Succinylcholine. The pale horse. In my field, we call it the perfect murder drug. It's a muscle relaxant used in surgeries to paralyze the body for intubation. In a high dose, it hits a conscious person like a bolt of lightning. In under 60 seconds, every muscle in your body freezes. You can't move. You can't scream. You can't even expand your chest to take a breath, but you can feel everything. You are fully awake, a prisoner in your own meat, watching your killer's face as you slowly suffocate. It's a 24-hour window, I said, looking directly into Sebastian's cold, flickering eyes. Succinylcholine metabolizes into naturally occurring succinic acid almost immediately in the blood. In a day, it'll be undetectable. That's why you're in such a hurry to cremate him, isn't it? You're not protecting his reputation. You're incinerating the evidence of a murder. Sebastian's smirk vanished. The air in the bathroom turned frigid. Detective, Sebastian said, his voice now a low, dangerous growl. My family has already signed a private waiver with the district attorney's office. No autopsy. We are taking the body now. If Dr. Reed touches him again, I want her arrested for desecrating a deceased person. The detective looked at me with genuine pity, then at the power of the Reed name standing behind Sebastian. He stepped between me and the tub. I'm sorry. Madeline, my hands are tied. The district attorney cleared the release. You need to leave. Now. I didn't fight them. I didn't have to. I had seen the mark. I looked at Beatrice one last time, her face a mask of triumph. You think the fire will save you, I whispered, but the dead have a way of leaving behind more than just ash. The private funeral home was a fortress of mahogany and silence, tucked away in a pine forest where the wealthy bury their secrets. The Reeds hadn't just booked a service, they had bought the building for the night. No mourners, no flowers, just a chilling, clinical rush toward the furnace. I stood in the shadows of the viewing room, watching as the morticians moved with an efficient, robotic grace. They had already applied the makeup, masking the unnatural pink of Julian's skin with a thick layer of peach-toned wax. Outside, on the veranda, I could see the orange ember of Sebastian's cigarette. He was on the phone, likely discussing the stock price or the transfer of Julian's remaining shares. He thought he had won. He thought that by blocking the official autopsy, he had silenced the only witness. But he forgot that I have spent a decade being the family's invisible fixer. I know how to move through their world without leaving a footprint. When the morticians stepped out for their final break, I moved. I didn't feel like a grieving widow. I felt like a thief in the night, a scavenger for the truth. I slipped toward the open casket, my oversized blazer hiding the tools I had managed to keep after being escorted from the mansion. I looked at Julian. This was the isolation Beatrice had perfected, making me feel like the intruder in my own marriage, making the world believe I was the cold, unloved pathologist, while Julian was the vibrant, cheating businessman. They wanted me to doubt my own eyes, my own memory of the man who had shielded me during a motorcycle crash 10 years ago. But the body doesn't lie, even when the family does. "I'm sorry, Julian," I whispered, "but I'm the only one left who can hear you." I pulled a small, specialized scalpel from my sleeve. My hands were steady, a biological miracle given the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I didn't need a full opening. I needed the history of his blood. I gently lifted his head, sliding the blade into the thick hair at the nape of his neck. I took a lock of hair, root and all, and tucked it into a tiny bag I'd hidden in my clothes. Next, his fingernails. I took his cold, stiff hand. The click of the clipper sounded like a gunshot in the vaulted room. I froze, my eyes darting toward the glass doors where Sebastian's silhouette remained still. I took the samples. Hair and nails are the body's hard drive. They store the chemical history that the blood discards. Succinylcholine might vanish from the veins, but the metabolic stress and the minute traces of its precursors linger in the keratin. I was tucking the samples back when the heavy oak doors creaked open. I didn't jump. I didn't gasp. I simply leaned over the casket and adjusted Julian's silk tie, my face a mask of devastated longing. "That's enough, Madeline." Sebastian's voice was a cold blade at my back. I turned slowly, my eyes brimming with tears I forced from the well of my own exhaustion. "I just wanted to say goodbye, Sebastian." "Is that a crime too?" He walked toward me, his gaze searching for any sign of the theft. I hunched my shoulders, playing the role of the broken, vulnerable woman he expected me to be. To him, I was just a pet that needed to be managed. "The service starts in 10 minutes, he said, his voice dripping with a fake, oily compassion. "Then, the cremation. It's better this way. For everyone. The family will ensure you're taken care of, Madeline, as long as you behave." I lowered my head, the samples of my husband's hair and nails pressed against my heart. "I understand," I whispered. I walked out of that room as the roar of the crematorium burners ignited in the distance. Sebastian thought he was watching the evidence of a murder turn into smoke. He didn't realize that the most damning evidence was walking out the front door in a widow's pocket. This wasn't revenge. It was accounting. And the Reed family was about to find out they were deeply in debt. The rain began to lash against the windows of the small, unmarked laboratory in a forgotten industrial corner of the city. Across from me sat Chris, a man who lived in the digital shadows. He didn't ask about the black mourning veil still draped over my shoulders or the frantic energy in my eyes. He just looked at the flash drive I'd pushed across the table. "I'm risking 10 years in prison for this, Madeline," Chris whispered, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. The order to scrub the airport departures footage came from the district attorney's office, not the police. The district attorney. That's a lot of weight to move for a simple business trip. "Just run the analysis, Chris," I said, my voice as cold as the liquid nitrogen in the vats behind us. "I need to see him." The screen flickered to life. There was the airport terminal, 6 a.m., on the morning Julian supposedly left for London. I watched the man in the charcoal suit, the suit I had helped him pick out, walk toward the security lane. He looked identical to Julian. The same height, the same broad shoulders, the same expensive, decisive gait. But I wasn't looking at the clothes. I was looking at the physics of the stride. "Run the skeletal markers," I commanded. "Load the baseline from the family video I gave you." Chris tapped a series of keys. On the left side of the screen, a wireframe skeleton of Julian from a year ago appeared, walking across a lawn. A green line graphed the rhythm of his steps. On the right, the man at the airport was converted into a matching wireframe. "Okay, syncing now," Chris muttered. The graphs overlapped. Julian's baseline showed a characteristic hitch, a 0.03-second weight compensation on his left side, a permanent ghost of the motorcycle accident that had saved my life 10 years ago. It was his biological signature, as unique as a fingerprint. The airport man's graph was a perfect, symmetrical wave. 50-50 weight distribution. A flawless, athletic stride. "It's not him," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "The man who boarded the flight to London." It wasn't Julian. "The height is a match to within a centimeter," Chris said, leaning in. "The facial recognition hit 70%, which is high enough for a manual override by a bribed agent. But the gait is a total mismatch. This guy is a pro, a body double." I sat back, my mind spinning into the blackest depths of a conspiracy I had only glimpsed until now. Julian hadn't died in a bathtub rendezvous. He had been replaced before he ever left the country. This wasn't just a murder to cover up an affair. It was an extraction. The Reed family hadn't been hiding a scandal. They were hiding a survival. Julian was a high-value asset, and Sebastian was the fixer who had found a way to liquidate him while keeping the Reed empire intact. But if Julian was at the airport and a double was in his place, then who was in the bathtub? I pulled out the toxicology report Dr. Peterson had finished an hour ago. The hair and nail samples didn't just show succinylcholine. They showed a genetic markers report I'd asked for on a whim. The DNA in the hair I'd harvested from the corpse was a 99.9% match to Julian. My heart stopped. A twin. Julian didn't have a twin. At least, not one on the birth records I'd seen in a decade of marriage. But as I stared at the gait analysis and the DNA report, the truth crystallized with a sickening, clinical clarity. Beatrice hadn't just birthed a CEO. She had kept a spare. A shadow brother, unrecorded and unloved, kept in the dark for the one day the Reed family would need a body to burn. They hadn't just killed my husband's brother. They were using the $1,200,000 transfer to track my reaction, waiting for me to take the money so I would become an accomplice to the fraud. "I need a copy of the gate report and the raw video," I said, my voice hardening into a lethal edge. "What are you going to do?" Chris asked, his face pale. "I'm going to finish the audit," I said, "and then I'm going to close the account." The glass and steel monolith of the Reed corporate headquarters felt like a mausoleum at 85 stories up. I didn't wait for the receptionist to announce me. I didn't care about the panicked looks of the junior associates as I walked through the double oak doors of the boardroom. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of expensive espresso and the quiet hum of an empire rearranging itself. Sebastian was sitting at the head of the table, his gold-rimmed glasses reflecting the morning light. Beatrice sat to his right, her fingers interlaced, watching a digital ticker of the company's stock price. "Madeline," Sebastian said, not even looking up from his tablet. "This is a private meeting. We're in the middle of a transition. Security will be happy to show you out if you haven't processed your grief yet." "I'm not here as a widow, Sebastian," I said, my voice cutting through the executive silence like a scalpel through skin. "I'm here as the lead pathologist of the county, and I've come to deliver the final audit on the body you turned to ash last night." I walked to the head of the table and slid a thick folder across the mahogany surface. I didn't wait for him to open it. I tapped the remote on the wall, and the massive presentation screen flickered to life. "This," I said, pointing to the wave patterns of the gait analysis, "is Julian's biological signature. The hitch in his left leg. The permanent ghost of his sacrifice. And this perfect wave next to it? That's the man you sent to London. A man with a perfect stride. A man who isn't Julian." Beatrice's face didn't move, but her knuckles turned white. "And this?" I continued, sliding the toxicology report toward the board members, "is the chemical signature of succinylcholine. The pale horse, it doesn't leave a trace in the blood after 24 hours, but it leaves a mountain of evidence in the hair follicles and fingernails. Your son, or the man you claimed was your son died of clinical asphyxiation while fully conscious. He watched you strip him. He watched you pose him in that bathtub. He felt the weight of Brianna's body being draped over him to sell a lie. Sebastian stood up, his face twisted into a mask of cold fury. This is a fabrication. A desperate, delusional attempt by a woman who can't accept her husband was a degenerate. The body is gone, Madeline. The evidence is smoke. That's where you're wrong, I said, leaning in until I could smell the fear beneath his cologne. I didn't just take samples of his hair. I took the digital gait analysis from the airport. I took the DNA sequencing that proves the man in that tub was a 99.9% match to Julian. A secret twin. Sebastian. A spare you kept in the shadows for a rainy day, but you didn't just commit murder. You committed insurance fraud, securities fraud, and a federal conspiracy to extract a CEO from a pending embezzlement indictment. I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. A live feed of the Internal Revenue Service field office and the Securities and Exchange Commission headquarters appeared. The 1,200,000 you wired me? I've already flagged it as a fraudulent transfer linked to money laundering, I said. The federal agents are in the lobby. Sebastian, they aren't here for a statement. They're here for the assets. Beatrice finally looked up. Her eyes were hollow, the eyes of a woman who had gambled her soul and lost the house. Madeline, she whispered, her voice cracking. We are family. Think of the legacy. Think of Julian. I looked at her, and for the first time in 10 years, I felt absolutely nothing. No obligation, no guilt, no shadow. I am thinking of Julian, I said. The man who threw himself in front of a car for me. The man who would be disgusted by what you've done in his name. You told me to behave, Beatrice. You told me the family would take care of me. Well, I'm taking care of the family now. The sound of heavy boots and the sharp calls of federal agents echoed from the hallway. Sebastian reached for his phone, but I was faster. I pressed my hand down on his, pinning it to the table. I'm not family anymore, Beatrice, I said, my voice a final, clinical strike. I'm the coroner, and the time of death for the Reed legacy is right now. The roar of the city felt different as I walked out of the Reed corporate headquarters for the last time. It was no longer a cacophony of pressure and expectations. It was just background noise. Behind me, the lobby was a swarm of dark windbreakers with yellow letters. I watched through the revolving glass doors as Sebastian was led toward a black vehicle, his wrists bound in steel, his gold-rimmed glasses sliding down his nose. He looked small. For the first time in his life, he couldn't negotiate his way out of the physics of his own crimes. I walked toward the lake, the cold Chicago wind biting at my cheeks, but I didn't pull my coat tighter. I wanted to feel it. I wanted to feel the sting of reality after a decade of living in the curated, artificial warmth of the Reed family. My phone buzzed. A news alert. Julian Reed apprehended at Heathrow Airport. I didn't open the article. I didn't need to see the grainy photo of my husband being tackled by Interpol agents. I already knew the man. He had become a man who would murder his own shadow and use his wife as a shield for his tax returns. The man who had saved me from that motorcycle crash 10 years ago hadn't died in a bathtub. He had died slowly, piece by piece. As greed replaced his blood, I sat on a concrete bench overlooking the gray, churning water of Lake Michigan. I pulled up my bank app. The $1,200,000 was gone, frozen by the federal government as evidence of fraud. I felt a profound sense of lightness. That money had been a shackle, a final attempt by Beatrice to buy my soul. Now, I was broke, I was a widow, and my reputation was tied to the biggest corporate scandal of the decade. And yet, I had never felt more powerful. I looked at my hands, the hands of a pathologist. They were steady, they were clean. I had fulfilled my oath. I had listened to the silent witnesses, and I had given the dead the only thing they have left, the truth. I stood up and began to walk toward the morgue. I had a shift starting in an hour. There would be new files, new bodies, and new lies to uncover. but the shadows of the Reed family wouldn't be following me into the lab. Justice isn't always served in a courtroom with a gavel. Sometimes, it's served in a silent room with a scalpel and a microscope. If you think Madeline did the right thing by destroying a legacy to find the truth, hit the share button and follow for the next case.